It wasn't the scream that haunted the witnesses at the diner that night. Screams are common in this part of the city. No, it was the sound. The sickening, dry snap of a bone giving way. That was the sound of Sienna's life breaking in two. She was just a waitress trying to survive a ghost from her past. He was the most feared man in the city, a man who burned the world down for those he claimed. When her ex-boyfriend shattered her arm, she didn't call the police. She called the devil. And the devil, he answered on the first ring. The neon sign of the Night Owl Diner flickered with a dying hum, casting a sickly pink glow onto the wet pavement of 4th Street. It was 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday in Chicago. The kind of cold that settles in your marrow and refuses to leave. Inside, Sienna Cross wiped down the Formica counter for the 10th time. Her wrist ached a phantom pain from the repetitive motion, but it was the only thing keeping her grounded. The diner was empty, save for old man Henderson, nursing a cold coffee in the corner booth, but he was asleep. He was harmless. The man who walked through the door 3 minutes later was not. The bells above the door didn't jingle cheerfully. They rattled like a warning. Sienna froze the rag, stopping mid-swirl on the counter. She knew that heavy, uneven gait. She knew the smell of stale bourbon and cheap cigarettes that rushed in with the wind. "Thanos," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. Thanos Vane looked like a ruin of a man. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with the dark circles of a 3-day bender. He wore a leather jacket that she had bought him 2 Christmases ago, back when she was stupid, back when she thought love was enough to fix a broken thing. "Register looked full from the window, sir," Thanos said, his voice a gravelly slur. He didn't look at her face. He looked at her hands, or rather, the emptiness of them. "I need a loan." "I don't have money, Thanos. I'm working double shifts just to pay rent on that studio apartment. Please, just go." Sienna took a step back, her hip bumping into the coffee machine. "Don't lie to me." Thanos slammed his hand on the counter. Henderson jumped in his sleep but didn't wake. "I know you kept the tips from the weekend. I know you're holding out on me." "We're done, Thanos. We've been done for 6 months. You have no right." He moved faster than a drunk man should. He vaulted the counter, his boots skidding on the greasy tiles. Sienna tried to run toward the kitchen, toward the swinging metal doors where the hefty cook Sal usually stood guard. But Sal had left 20 minutes ago for a smoke break that turned into a grocery run. She was alone. Thanos caught her by the ponytail, jerking her head back. She yelped, stumbling backward. He spun her around, shoving her hard against the prep table. Her lower back collided with the stainless steel edge, knocking the wind out of her. "I said," Thanos hissed, leaning in close, his breath hot and rancid on her neck. "Give me the cash." "It's in the safe. I don't have the combination," Sienna cried, tears pricking her eyes. "Only the manager has it. Liar." He grabbed her left arm. He didn't just grab it. He twisted. It was a move he had learned in bar fights, a move designed to incapacitate. He wrenched her arm up behind her back, forcing the joint beyond its natural rotation. "Thanos, stop. You're hurting me." "Where is it, Sienna?" He pushed the arm higher. "I swear I don't." He shoved her forward while jerking the arm upward with a sudden violent spasm of rage. Snap. The sound was loud. It was louder than the rain outside. Louder than the hum of the fridge. It was a dry wooden crack that echoed off the tiled walls. Sienna's scream died in her throat, replaced by a wave of nausea so intense the room spun. Her vision went white. The pain didn't register instantly. It was a cold shock first, a realization that her arm was dangling at an angle that defied anatomy. Thanos let go, stepping back as if burned. He looked at her arm, then at his own hands. You made me do that. You shouldn't have lied. Sienna couldn't speak. She cradled her shattered left arm with her right hand, sliding down the front of the prep table until she hit the floor. The pain arrived, then a searing hot iron rod driven through her forearm. I'm gonna check the back, Thanos muttered, panic rising in his voice. He wasn't checking for money anymore. He was looking for a way out, or maybe a weapon to silence the witness. He stumbled toward the manager's office. Sienna knew she had seconds. Adrenaline, the body's last mercy, flooded her system. She scrambled up her left arm, swinging uselessly, screaming with every movement. She bolted, not for the exit, Thanos was blocking that path, but for the employee locker room at the back of the kitchen. She threw herself inside, slamming the heavy steel door and sliding the deadbolt home just as Thanos's body slammed against the other side. "Open the door, Si, don't make this worse," he roared, kicking the metal. Sienna slid to the floor, gasping for air. The room was dark, smelling of bleach and dirty aprons. She reached into her pocket with her shaking right hand. Her phone. 14% battery. She looked at the screen. Her thumb hovered over 911. But she stopped. The police had come before. They had filed a report. They had given Thanos a warning, and 2 days later, Thanos had been back laughing about how his cousin on the force lost the paperwork. The law in this precinct was bought and paid for, and Thanos, lowlife as he was, had connections to the bottom feeders who paid the bribes. If she called the cops, they would take 20 minutes. Thanos would break this door down in 5. She needed something faster, something final. With trembling fingers, she opened her wallet. Tucked behind her ID, hidden where no one would look, was a heavy card. It wasn't paper. It was black matte metal, the edges sharp enough to cut skin. On it, there was no name, no business logo. Just a single golden embossed phone number. She remembered the man who gave it to her. 3 months ago. A man in a charcoal suit who sat in booth 4 drinking espresso, while 3 large men stood guard by the door. She had served him without fear, without spilling a drop, even when a rival gang member had walked in and threatened the place. She had calmly poured the coffee, looked the rival in the eye, and told him to take his business outside. The man in the suit had left a $100 tip, and this card. "If you ever find yourself in a corner, you can't talk your way out of," he had said, his voice like velvet over gravel. "Call this, but only call it once." Sienna dialed the number. It rang once. "Speak," a voice answered, deep, calm, dangerous. He broke my arm," Sienna sobbed, the pain finally breaking her resolve. "He's outside the door. He's going to kill me." A pause. The silence on the other end was heavier than the storm outside. "Who is this?" "Sienna, the waitress, from the Night Owl." The tone on the other end shifted instantly. The coolness evaporated, replaced by a sharp, lethal intensity. "Where are you right now?" "In the locker room. He's kicking the door." Thud. Thud. The door hinges groaned. "What is his name?" "Thanos. Thanos Vane." "Sienna," the voice commanded, anchoring her. "Put the phone in your pocket. Do not hang up. I'm 3 minutes away." 3 minutes? She whimpered. "I don't have 3 minutes." "For me you do. Stay down." 3 minutes is an eternity when you are bleeding out or when a man is trying to kill you. Sienna curled into a ball beneath the rows of hanging aprons. The kicking had stopped. That was worse. Silence meant Thanos was thinking. Silence meant he was looking for a crowbar. "I know you're in there, Si." Thanos's voice came through the metal, muffled but clear. "I just want to talk. I can fix the arm. I know a guy. Just open the door." Sienna bit her lip until it bled to keep from screaming. Her arm was throbbing with a pulse of its own, swollen to twice its size inside her uniform sleeve. She could feel the jagged edge of the bone pressing against her skin. "Please," she prayed. "Please let him be real." She had heard the rumors about Lorenzo Enzo De Luca, the Don of the West Side, the man who owned the ports, the unions, and half the judges in the city. He wasn't a savior. He was a monster who kept other monsters on a leash. Why would a man like that come for a waitress? Because she had saved him that night. She hadn't just served him coffee. She had seen the man with the gun approaching the window and had accidentally dropped a tray of glasses, causing Enzo to look up just in time to dodge the first bullet. He owed her a life, and De Luca always paid his debts. Crash! The tip of a fire axe punched through the metal door inches from the lock. Sienna screamed, scrambling backward into the corner. "There you are!" Thanos laughed a manic, terrifying sound. He yanked the axe back and swung again. The metal shrieked. One more swing, and the lock would give. Sienna closed her eyes. She clutched the phone in her pocket. "Enzo," she whispered. Suddenly the noise outside the diner changed. It wasn't the sound of sirens. It was the screech of tires. Not one car, but several. Heavy engines revving, then cutting off simultaneously. The axe stopped mid-swing. Thanos had heard it too. "Who the hell is that?" Thanos grunted. Sienna heard the front bells of the diner jingle, but this time they didn't rattle. The door was opened with purpose. "We're closed," Thanos shouted toward the front, trying to sound tough, though his voice wavered. "Get out." No response, just the sound of footsteps, hard leather-soled shoes clicking on the tile. Slow, deliberate, rhythmically terrifying. Click-clack, click-clack. "I said get the hell out," Thanos yelled, abandoning the door to the locker room. He walked back out into the main diner area. Sienna pressed her ear against the cold metal door. "Thanos Vane," a voice echoed. It was the voice from the phone. Smooth, dark, and utterly devoid of fear. "You have something that belongs to me." "Who are you?" Thanos's voice cracked. "You're De Luca. And you are a waste of oxygen. Look, man, I don't want no trouble with the families. This is a domestic dispute. Just my girl acting up." "Your girl?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Open the door, Thanos." What? "The locker room. Open it." "She's my bitch. I can do what I want," Thanos shouted, trying to summon the courage of the desperate. There was a sickening sound. Not a gunshot. It sounded like a wet thud, followed by a gargled cry. Then the sound of a body hitting a table, shattering plates. "Open it," Enzo said again. His voice not even raised. Sienna heard a scramble, then the sound of the axe dropping to the floor. Thanos was sobbing now. Okay, please." The handle of the locker room door turned. The bolt had been damaged enough by the axe that it slid open. The light from the diner poured into the dark room, blinding Sienna. Standing in the doorway was Thanos. But he wasn't looking at her. He was being held up by the scruff of his neck by a man who looked like a mountain, one of Enzo's guards. Thanos's face was already a mask of blood. And behind him, stepping through the carnage with the grace of a panther, was Lorenzo De Luca. He wore a black trench coat over a bespoke suit that cost more than the diner itself. His dark hair was slicked back, rain glistening on his shoulders. His eyes, the color of cold espresso, scanned the room until they landed on Sienna. He saw the tears, he saw the terror, and then his gaze dropped to her left arm, hanging limp and twisted. A muscle in Enzo's jaw ticked. It was the only sign of emotion he showed. He walked past Thanos without sparing him a glance. He knelt in front of Sienna, disregarding the dirty floor that would ruin his trousers. "Sienna," he said softly. "You came," she whispered, her body trembling uncontrollably. "I told you," he said, reaching out. His hands were large, warm, and incredibly gentle. He hovered his fingers over her arm, but didn't touch the injury. "Can you stand?" I think so." He nodded to the guard holding Thanos. "Keep him alive. But only just." "No, no, please," Thanos screamed as the guard dragged him toward the kitchen exit. Enzo didn't blink. He slid his right arm under Sienna's knees and his left around her back, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. Sienna buried her face in the expensive wool of his coat, the scent of sandalwood and rain overwhelming the smell of grease. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice slurring as the adrenaline began to fade and shock set in. Enzo walked her out of the locker room, through the diner, past the overturned tables. He stepped out into the rainy Chicago night, where 3 black Cadillac Escalades were idling. A small army of men in suits stood in a perimeter, unmoving in the downpour. One of them opened the back door of the middle car. Enzo placed her gently on the leather seat, then climbed in beside her. He pulled a cashmere blanket from a compartment and draped it over her shivering frame. "We are going home," Enzo said, signaling the driver. "And then I am going to burn his world down." Sienna looked out the tinted window as the car pulled away. She saw the lights of the diner fade. She saw the silhouette of the guard dragging Thanos into the alley. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the prey. She was with the predator. And God help her, she had never felt safer. The city blurred past the tinted windows of the Escalade, a streak of rain-slicked lights and shadows. Inside the car, the silence was absolute, save for Sienna's jagged breathing. The adrenaline was fading fast, leaving behind a cold, shivering shock. Enzo hadn't let go of her. He held her against his side, his arm a rigid bar of protection. He was on his phone, typing furiously with one hand, his face illuminated by the harsh blue light of the screen. "Dr. Evans is prepping the suite," Enzo said, his voice low, vibrating against her temple. "We aren't going to a hospital. Too many questions. Too much paperwork. I can't afford a private doctor." Sienna mumbled, her teeth chattering. The pain in her arm was now a blinding, white-hot pulse that synced with her heartbeat. Enzo looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "Money is a concept for people who have to ask for things. You are with me now. You don't pay for anything." The car turned smoothly into the underground garage of the Spire, the tallest residential building in the city. Security guards in grey tactical uniforms nodded as the convoy passed. They didn't look like doormen. They looked like paramilitaries. When the car stopped, Enzo carried her again. He refused the wheelchair the concierge rolled out. He carried her into the private elevator that required a retinal scan to open. 40th floor, a mechanical voice announced. The doors slid open to reveal a penthouse that looked less like a home and more like a fortress made of glass and steel. The view of Chicago was breathtaking, a sprawl of gold and darkness. But Sienna only saw the grey-haired man waiting by a medical gurney in the center of the living room. "Put her down gently, Lorenzo," Dr. Evans said. He was an older man, with steady hands and eyes that had seen too many bullet wounds to be shocked by a broken arm. Enzo laid her on the gurney. "She's in shock. The break is bad, Doc. I heard the snap." Dr. Evans cut the sleeve of her uniform with surgical scissors. Sienna gasped as the fabric pulled away, revealing the purple and black swelling that distorted her forearm. The bone was pressing alarmingly against the skin, threatening to break through. "Compound fracture avoided barely," Dr. Evans muttered, his fingers probing gently. "Sienna, I'm going to give you something for the pain. It's going to feel like a warm blanket. Just let it happen." He injected a clear liquid into her IV. Within seconds, the room softened. The sharp edges of the furniture blurred. The excruciating pain in her arm dulled to a distant throb. "I have to reset the bone," Dr. Evans told Enzo. "You might want to step out. It's not a pretty sound." "I'm staying," Enzo said. He moved to the head of the gurney, taking Sienna's uninjured hand in his. "Look at me, Sienna. Don't look at the arm. Look at my eyes." Sienna focused on him. His eyes were dark, intense, swirling with a suppressed rage that she knew wasn't directed at her. He smoothed the hair back from her sweaty forehead. "Why?" She slurred, the drugs taking hold. "Why did you come?" "Because you called," he said simply. "Okay on 3, Dr. Evans warned. 1, 2. Crack. Sienna screamed a raw, guttural sound that was cut short as she squeezed Enzo's hand so hard her knuckles turned white. Enzo didn't flinch. He leaned in his forehead, resting against hers, absorbing her pain. "It's done," he whispered. "It's over. Breathe, Doctor." Evans worked quickly, wrapping the arm in a cast that hardened rapidly. "She needs rest. No stress. And for God's sake, Lorenzo, keep the police away from her. She's fragile. The police won't find her," Enzo promised. "She doesn't exist anymore." Sienna drifted into the darkness of the sedatives, the last thing she felt being Enzo's lips brushing against her temple. A kiss that felt like a vow. 3 hours later. The basement of the spire was soundproof. It had to be. It was originally designed as a wine cellar, but the humidity controls made it perfect for other things. Thanos Vane was tied to a steel chair in the center of the room. His face was a map of regret. One eye swollen shut, his lip split, and ribs likely cracked from the ride over. Enzo stood in the shadows, removing his suit jacket. He unbuttoned his cuffs and rolled his white sleeves up to his elbows with methodical precision. He didn't look like a mob boss. He looked like a surgeon preparing to operate. "Please," Thanos wheezed, spitting blood onto the concrete. "I didn't know she was yours. I swear to God, DeLuca, I thought she was just a waitress." Enzo stepped into the light. He didn't hold a weapon. He didn't need one. "She isn't just anything," Enzo said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "But we aren't here to talk about her. We're here to talk about you." Enzo circled the chair. "You're a low-level junkie, Thanos. You owe $3,000 to the bookies on 5th Street. You lost your job at the auto plant 6 months ago. You are broke." Enzo stopped in front of him. "So imagine my surprise when my men searched your pockets and found this." Enzo held up a small, clear plastic bag. Inside were tightly rolled bundles of cash, fresh bills, sequential serial numbers. $5,000. "That's a lot of money for a broke man to be carrying while robbing a diner for spare change," Enzo said. Thanos's good eye widened. He tried to look away. I won it. Scratch-offs. Smack. Enzo's backhand was lightning fast. The chair rattled. "Don't insult my intelligence," Enzo said, wiping his hand on a handkerchief. "You went to the diner tonight, but not for the register. You went there to create a scene. To hurt her. No, I just wanted the money. Liar." Enzo leaned in close. "You grabbed her arm. You twisted it. But before that, my men checked the security footage from the street. You were waiting outside for 20 minutes. You were on the phone. Who were you talking to?" "Nobody, my mum." Enzo sighed. He nodded to the corner of the room. A man stepped forward. Luca, Enzo's second-in-command. Luca held a tablet. "We pulled his call logs, boss," Luca said, his voice bored. "One number repeated 6 times in the last hour. It's a burner, but we traced the signal triangulation." "And?" Enzo asked. "It pinged from the precinct," Luca said. "Specifically the office of Detective Schreiber." The air in the room shifted. Thanos went pale beneath the bruises. Enzo's eyes narrowed. Detective Schreiber, the vice squad captain, a man who had been a thorn in Enzo's side for years, but who had always been too careful to touch. "Schreiber," Enzo repeated. He looked at Thanos. "Why is a dirty cop paying a junkie to break a waitress's arm?" "He didn't pay me to break her arm," Thanos blurted out, sobbing. "He paid me to plant the package. Breaking her arm was an accident. She just wouldn't get out of the way." Enzo went very still. "What package? The bug?" Thanos whispered, his resistance crumbling. "Schreiber said you go there every Tuesday. He said he needed ears in the diner. He told me to tape a listener under the 3rd booth. I was supposed to rough her up to make it look like a robbery, so no one would be suspicious if I was fumbling around under the tables." Enzo stared at the man. The revelation settled over him like a shroud. This wasn't just domestic abuse. This was an act of war. Schreiber wasn't working alone. A cop doesn't plant bugs on a don unless he has federal backing or worse backing from a rival family. The Russos. They were making a move, and they had used Sienna, innocent, hard-working Sienna, as the distraction. They had ordered her pain. They had authorized her trauma just to plant a microphone. A cold fury unlike anything Enzo had felt in years overtook him. "You broke her," Enzo said softly. "For $5,000 and a favor to a pig. I'm sorry, I'll leave town. I'll never see her again." Enzo turned his back on him. He walked towards the stairs. "Luca," Enzo said without looking back. "Yes, boss. He says he likes to break things." Enzo opened the door to the upstairs. "Show him how it feels. Start with the fingers, then the toes. Make it last all night." As Enzo closed the heavy door, the first scream echoed from the basement. It didn't bring him any joy. It didn't fix Sienna's arm. But it was a start. Sunlight hit Sienna's face, sharp and intrusive. She blinked, groaning as she tried to shift. The bed was enormous, the sheets soft as clouds. For a moment she thought she was dead. Then the weight of the cast on her left arm brought the memories rushing back. The diner. Thanos. The snap. Enzo. She sat up gasping as a wave of dizziness hit her. She was wearing a silk shirt that wasn't hers. It was a man's dress shirt, buttoned up to her chin. "Careful," a voice rumbled from the corner. Enzo was sitting in a velvet armchair by the window. He had showered and changed. He wore a black turtleneck and grey trousers, looking like the model on the cover of a GQ magazine if the model carried the weight of a dozen murders in his eyes. "Where am I?" Sienna asked, her voice raspy. "My bedroom," Enzo said. "It has the best security and the best view." He stood up and walked over to the bed, holding a glass of water with a straw. He held it to her lips. She drank greedily. "I have to go to work," Sienna said, panic rising. "Sal will be alone. The morning rush. The diner is closed." "Sienna," Enzo said gently. "I bought the building this morning. It's undergoing renovations." Sienna stared at him. "You what?" "And you don't work there anymore," he continued. "You don't work anywhere. You can't just decide that." Sienna tried to swing her legs out of bed, but he blocked her path, placing his hands on either side of her hips on the mattress. He wasn't touching her, but he was trapping her. "Listen to me," Enzo said, his intensity frightening her. "This wasn't random. Thanos didn't just snap. He was paid to hurt you." Sienna froze. "What by who?" "People who want to get to me," Enzo said. "They knew I cared about the diner. They knew I respected you. They used you to get a device into the booth. You are a loose end, Sienna. If you go back out there, they will finish what Thanos started." Sienna's breath hitched. "So I'm what, a prisoner?" "You are a guest," Enzo corrected. "A very protected guest. Until I deal with the people who did this, you stay here. You stay where I can see you." "And how long will that be?" Enzo's eyes darkened. He reached out his thumb, tracing the line of her jaw. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through her that had nothing to do with fear. "As long as it takes to burn them all down," he vowed. He stood up, walking toward the door. "Breakfast is on the way. Eat, rest. Do not open the door for anyone but me or Luca." "Enzo," she called out before he left. He paused, hand on the doorknob. "Thank you," she whispered, "for coming." He didn't turn around, but she saw his shoulders tense. "I should have come sooner." He left the lock, clicking, engaging with a heavy thud. Sienna sank back into the pillows. She looked at the cast on her arm, then at the sprawling city outside the window. She was trapped in a golden couch with a monster, but for the first time in her life, she didn't want to escape. She wanted to see the monster eat the people who hurt her. The silence in the penthouse was heavier than the cast on Sienna's arm. 4 days had passed since the incident at the Night Owl Diner. 4 days of waking up in sheets that cost more than her annual rent, eating meals prepared by a silent chef, and staring out at the Chicago skyline through bulletproof glass. Enzo had called it a home. Sienna felt it was a gilded cage. Lorenzo De Luca was a ghost in his own fortress. He left before the sun breached the horizon and returned long after the city lights had taken hold, usually smelling of cigar smoke and cold rain. He would check on her brief, intense visits where he would inspect her cast and ask about her sun levels with a clinical detachment that barely masked a simmering volcanic rage. He was planning something. She could feel it in the way the air pressure seemed to drop whenever he entered the room. On the 5th afternoon, the isolation became suffocating. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the holding of breath before a scream. Sienna paced the length of the living room, her left arm secured in a black sling that matched the somber mood of the apartment. She was wearing one of Enzo's dress shirts again. The sleeves rolled up the hem, hitting her mid-thigh. It was a constant tactile reminder of whose protection she was under. She wandered down the long marble hallway. At the end stood the double oak doors to Enzo's private study. She had been told explicitly by Luca, the second in command, who treated her with a mix of suspicion and deference, that the room was off limits. "Don't go in there, Sienna. There are things in that room that don't wash off." But Luca was downstairs in the security center, and Enzo was gone. Sienna pushed the heavy door. It was unlocked. It swung open on silent hinges, revealing a room that smelled of old paper mahogany and the metallic tang of gun oil. It wasn't just a study. It was a war room. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn, blocking out the daylight. The only illumination came from a banker's lamp on the massive desk, casting long, eerie shadows against the walls. And the walls. They were covered. Sienna stepped inside, her heart hammering against her ribs. Corkboards lined the perimeter of the room, creating a panoramic view of Chicago's criminal underworld. Strings of red yarn connected mugshots to locations, bank accounts to shell companies. It was a map of corruption. She moved closer to the central board, the one labeled Current. In the middle was a picture of the Night Owl Diner. A chill ran down her spine. Seeing her workplace, her sanctuary, pinned up like a crime scene, made her stomach turn. There were photos of the booth where she had been attacked. Photos of Thanos, his face swollen from Enzo's interrogation, with a red line connecting him to Detective Schreiber. Enzo had it figured out, or he thought he did. The narrative on the board was clear. Schreiber, the dirty cop, was using Thanos to plant bugs in the diner to spy on Enzo for the Russo family. Sienna's eyes drifted from the center to the periphery of the board. Enzo was thorough. His men had taken surveillance photos of the diner from every angle for weeks, likely vetting the location long before the attack. There were grainy shots of the regulars, Sal flipping burgers, Mrs. Higgins eating pie, and old man Henderson. There were 3 photos of Henderson. In one, he was asleep in his booth, head on his arms. In another, he was sipping coffee. In the third, he was reading a newspaper. Sienna stared at the photo of him reading the paper. Something about it nagged at her, a detail that didn't fit the narrative of the harmless, senile octogenarian she had served for 2 years. She leaned in her nose, inches from the corkboard. In the photo, Henderson was holding a ceramic mug with his right hand. His left hand was turning the page of the paper. Sienna closed her eyes, replaying the hundreds of times she had poured him coffee. "Sorry, dear," he would always say, his hands shaking violently as he reached for the sugar. The nerves. They never came back right after the war. Shell shock. He would spill sugar on the table. He would need 2 hands to lift the cup to his trembling lips. But in the photo on Enzo's wall, taken through the diner window with a high-resolution telephoto lens, Henderson's hand was perfectly still. The liquid in the cup was level. There was no ripple, no shake. The tremor was a lie. Sienna's breath hitched. She looked at the next photo, Henderson sleeping in the booth. Enzo had labeled it Subject Henderson, status non-threat, civilian. But Sienna looked closer at the darkness under the table in the photo. A shadow, a shape. She remembered the night Thanos broke her arm. She had screamed. The sound had been ear-splitting. Yet Henderson hadn't moved. He hadn't flinched. At the time, she thought he was deep in a senile slumber. But nobody sleeps through the sound of a bone breaking. Unless they are waiting. He wasn't sleeping. Sienna realized the blood draining from her face, leaving her cold and dizzy. He was bracing. Her eyes frantically scanned the timeline Enzo had constructed. Tuesday, 02:00 a.m. Target. Enzo enters diner. Tuesday, 02, 10 a.m. Detective Schreiber enters diner. Wait. Schreiber didn't come to the diner to meet Enzo. Enzo was only there because he liked the coffee. Schreiber came to the diner every Tuesday at 2:10 a.m. like clockwork. And who else was there every Tuesday at 2:10 a.m.? Henderson, she whispered. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The diner wasn't a surveillance post. It was a bank. The Russos weren't trying to listen to Enzo. They were laundering money right under his nose. Old man Henderson wasn't a pensioner. He was the bag man. The tremor was an act to make him look feeble, invisible. Thanos wasn't paid to plant a bug. He was paid to cause a scene, a fight, a broken arm. Anything to draw attention away from the booth so Henderson could swap the bags with Schreiber during the chaos. And Enzo thought he was hunting a dirty cop. He didn't know he was walking into the den of a professional hitman who had been hiding in plain sight for years. The sound of the elevator dinging down the hall snapped her out of her trance. Heavy boots stomped on the marble. Rapid, urgent. Sienna spun around as Luca burst into the room. He wasn't wearing his usual suit jacket. He was wearing a tactical vest strapping a holster to his thigh. His face was pale, his eyes wide, with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. "What are you doing in here?" Luca barked, though he didn't have the time to be truly angry. He moved to the desk, grabbing a heavy black duffel bag. "Get back to your room, Sienna. Lock the door." "Where is Enzo?" Sienna demanded, stepping into his path. She ignored the lethal weapon he was checking. "He's gone to the meet," Luca said, his voice tight. Schreiber called, said he was ready to flip, said he had the Russo files. "Where is the meet, Luca?" "The diner," Luca said, slinging the bag over his shoulder. Schreiber said he wanted neutral ground. "It's a trap," Sienna said. Her voice didn't shake. The fear was gone, replaced by a crystalline clarity. Luca paused, looking at her like she was hysterical. "We know it's a setup, Sienna. Enzo took 2 guards. He's going to squeeze Schreiber for the info." "It's not Schreiber," Sienna screamed, grabbing Luca's vest with her good hand. "Schreiber is just the bait." "It's Henderson." Luca froze. "The old man. The one who eats apple pie." "He doesn't have a tremor," she yelled, pointing at the board. "Look at the photos. His hands are steady. He's been faking it for years. He's not a civilian. Luca, he's the cleaner. I saw him reach under the table once when a car backfired. He wasn't hiding. He was reaching for a weapon taped under the seat." Luca looked at the board, then back at Sienna. The color drained from his face as the pieces clicked into place. The old man who was always there. The invisible witness. The perfect assassin. "Boss thinks he's meeting a soft target," Luca whispered, horror dawning in his eyes. He went in light. He told the heavy extraction team to stand down so he wouldn't spook Schreiber. "He's walking into a kill box," Sienna said. "If Henderson is there, Enzo is dead." Luca checked his watch. "They've been dark for 10 minutes. Signal jammers. That's standard for a sit-down, but it means he can't call for help when the shooting starts." Luca swore a vicious curse that echoed in the quiet room. He looked at Sienna, really looked at her, and saw the fire burning in her eyes. She wasn't the broken waitress they had picked up off the floor anymore. She was a woman willing to burn for the man who saved her. "I need to get there," Luca said, racking the slide of his gun. "But the front will be covered. If Henderson is a pro, he'll have a sniper across the street or the doors rigged." "I know the way in," Sienna said. "The delivery chute in the alley. It leads to the basement pantry. It's too small for you, but I can fit. I can open the service door from the inside." "Absolutely not." Luca shook his head. "Enzo gave me one order. Keep you safe. If I bring you into a firefight, he will kill me himself." "If you don't take me," Sienna said, stepping closer, her eyes blazing. "There won't be an Enzo left to kill anyone." The silence stretched between them, thin and taut as a wire. Luca looked at the duffel bag, then at the photo of the Night Owl diner. He knew she was right. They needed a ghost to get inside that building, and Sienna was the only one who knew the skeleton of that place better than the rats. "You stay behind me," Luca growled, grabbing a set of keys from the desk. "You do exactly what I say, and if things go south, you run. You don't look back. You run." "Deal." Sienna lied. She would never run. Not this time. "Let's go." They ran for the elevator, leaving the safety of the glass fortress behind. As the doors closed, Sienna touched the cast on her arm. The bone had snapped 4 days ago, but as the elevator plummeted toward the garage, she felt stronger than she ever had in her life. She wasn't just a victim of the story anymore. She was coming to write the ending. The rain over Chicago wasn't just falling. It was punishing the earth. It battered the roof of the Night Owl diner like 1,000 tiny hammers drowning out the hum of the city. Inside the diner was a mausoleum of chrome and vinyl lit only by the low-wattage emergency bulbs that hummed with an anxious frequency. Enzo sat in booth 4, his back to the wall. He was unarmed. It was the condition Schreiber had insisted upon for the handover of the Russo files. Enzo's 2 best men, Marco and Silas, stood by the front entrance, their silhouettes sharp against the rain-streaked glass hands, hovering near their jackets. Across the table, Detective Schreiber was a mess. He was sweating despite the chill in the room, his eyes darting toward the kitchen door every few seconds. "The files, Detective," Enzo said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the noise of the storm. "My patience is a finite resource, and you are spending it rapidly." "They're coming," Schreiber stammered, wiping his upper lip with a trembling hand. "My contact. He's bringing the hard drive from the back. Just wait." Enzo drummed his fingers on the table. He surveyed the room. It felt wrong. The air was too thick. The shadows were too deep. He looked at the empty booth where Old Man Henderson usually sat. He looked at the ketchup bottle that was slightly out of place on the counter. His instincts, honed by a lifetime of violence, began to scream. "Get out, Marco," Enzo said softly, not taking his eyes off Schreiber. "Check the back." "No," Schreiber yelped, jumping slightly. "He'll spook. He needs to come to us." Enzo stopped drumming his fingers. He stared at the detective. "There is no contact, is there?" Schreiber opened his mouth to lie, but the kitchen doors swung open. It wasn't a contact. Old Man Henderson stepped out. But the man who emerged wasn't the hunched, trembling geriatric who spilled sugar on the floor. He stood tall, his spine straight, his movements fluid and predatory. He held a suppressed MP5 submachine gun with the casual familiarity of a man holding a television remote. "I told you he was sharp, Schreiber," Henderson said, his voice smooth, devoid of the fake gravelly rasp he had used for 3 years. Enzo didn't blink. "Henderson? Actually, it's Kovic. But I grew fond of the apple pie." Thwip, thwip. The suppressor hissed twice. 2 holes appeared in Detective Schreiber's chest, blooming red on his cheap suit. The detective slumped forward, his face hitting the table with a wet thud. He was dead before he realized his usefulness had expired. "Down!" Enzo roared, flipping the heavy table onto its side just as Henderson swung the muzzle toward him. Bullets chewed into the formica table, sending shards of plastic and wood flying into Enzo's face. By the door, Marco and Silas drew their weapons. They were fast, but Henderson was prepared. He didn't even look. He spun on his heel and fired a controlled burst toward the entrance. The glass of the front door shattered inward. Marco dropped instantly. Silas got off one shot that went wide before he too fell to the tiled floor. Silence returned to the diner, broken only by the rain and the click of Henderson reloading a fresh magazine. Enzo crouched behind the overturned table. He was trapped, unarmed, alone. "You know." Henderson called out his footsteps, clicking slowly on the tile as he flanked the booth. "The Russos paid a fortune for this contract. But honestly, I would have done it for free. You sat in my booth for 3 years, DeLuca. You and your arrogance. You never even looked at me." Enzo scanned his surroundings. A fork on the floor, a napkin dispenser. Nothing that could stop a submachine gun. "You hid well," Enzo said, his muscles coiling, preparing for a suicide charge. "Like a rat in the walls. Rats survive, Lorenzo. Kings die." Henderson stopped 10 feet away. He had the angle. He raised the weapon, aiming for the gap between the table and the wall. Enzo took a breath. This was it. The end of the road in a greasy diner on 4th Street. Click. The diner plunged into absolute darkness. Henderson hesitated. What the fuse box. Someone had cut the main line. Enzo didn't wait. He didn't need eyes to navigate this room. He needed chaos. He launched himself from behind the table, staying low, moving like a phantom. "Who's there?" Henderson shouted, firing a blind burst into the dark. The muzzle flashes lit up the room in strobe light intervals. Flash, 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 revealing snapshots of the violence. Crash. A heavy glass jar of maraschino cherries flew out of the darkness from the direction of the kitchen, smashing into the wall inches from Henderson's head. Henderson spun toward the noise. "You missed! I wasn't aiming at you," a female voice screamed. "Sienna." The distraction was all Enzo needed. He closed the distance, tackling Henderson, just as the next flash of lightning illuminated the room. They crashed into the service counter. The MP5 skittered across the floor, useless. Henderson was older, but he was wire-strong and trained in ways street brawlers weren't. He drove a knee into Enzo's ribs, winding him, and pulled a serrated combat knife from his boot. He slashed out the blade, catching Enzo's forearm, slicing through the expensive fabric of his suit and biting deep into the muscle. Enzo roared, not in pain, but in fury. He caught Henderson's wrist with his bloodied hand. "You touched her." Enzo snarled, the beast fully unleashed. He didn't use technique. He used brute, unadulterated rage. He twisted Henderson's arm, forcing it backward with a sickening crunch that echoed the sound of Sienna's arm breaking days ago. Henderson grunted, dropping the knife. Enzo slammed Henderson's head into the stainless steel coffee machine. Once. Twice the metal dented. Glass shattered. Scalding water hissed out, spraying over Henderson's face. The assassin flailed, trying to gouge Enzo's eyes. But Enzo was immovable. He was an avalanche. He grabbed Henderson by the throat, lifting him off his feet, and drove him backward into the pie display case. "For the arm," Enzo whispered, tightening his grip. "And for the fear you put in her eyes." Henderson gasped, his legs kicking uselessly until the light faded from his eyes. Enzo let go, and the body crumpled to the floor amidst the ruined pies and broken glass. Enzo stood there, chest heaving, blood dripping from his fingertips. The adrenaline was still pumping a roar in his ears. Enzo! The emergency red lights flickered on, bathing the diner in a hellish crimson glow. Standing in the kitchen doorway was Sienna. Her face was smudged with grease from the delivery chute, her hair wet with rain, her cast white and stark against the gloom. Behind her, Luca stood with his gun raised, scanning the room for threats that no longer existed. Enzo looked at the carnage. Schreiber dead at the table, his men down by the door. Henderson broken at his feet. Then he looked at her. He crossed the distance in 3 long strides. He didn't care about the blood on his hands. He didn't care about the war he had just started with the Russos. He grabbed her face, his thumbs smearing a streak of red on her cheek, his eyes frantic as he searched her for injuries. "I told you," he rasped, his voice breaking, "to stay in the house. I told you I knew the way in." Sienna countered, her voice shaking as the adrenaline crash hit her, tears welling in her eyes. "You would have died. He had the angle. You could have been killed, Sienna. Do you understand?" He shook her, slightly desperate to make her understand the terror he felt seeing her here. "If a bullet had hit you." "But it didn't," she whispered, stepping into his space, pressing her good hand against his chest right over his pounding heart. "I'm here. We're here." Enzo stared at her. He saw the defiance. He saw the loyalty. She hadn't cowered in his tower. She had crawled through the mud and the dark to save him. She wasn't a porcelain doll to be kept on a shelf. She was steel forged in the same fire as him. The anger drained out of him, replaced by a wave of possessiveness, so intense it nearly brought him to his knees. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was a collision of survival. It tasted of copper and rain and violence. He kissed her like he wanted to breathe for her, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her so close that not even air could pass between them. Sienna melted into him, gripping his ruined shirt, anchoring herself to the only solid thing in her world. When he finally pulled back, resting his forehead against hers, they were both gasping for air. "You are never going back to that apartment," Enzo said, his voice a low vow. "You aren't going back to your old life. You are mine, Sienna. Do you understand? There is no walking away from this." Sienna looked up at him. She looked at the blood on his face, the danger in his eyes, and the absolute devotion that lay beneath it. She thought of Thanos, of the loneliness of the cold nights counting tips. Then she felt the warmth of Enzo's arms, a fortress that had moved heaven and earth and walked into a trap just to avenge her pain. "I know," she whispered, tracing the sharp line of his jaw. "Is that a command, Don DeLuca?" She asked, a small, tired smile ghosting her lips. Enzo looked at her, his dark eyes softening for the first time in years. He kissed the plaster of her cast, then her palm. "No," he said softly. "It's a surrender. I can burn the world down, Sienna, but I don't want to rule the ashes alone." "Then take me home," she said. Enzo scooped her up into his arms, ignoring the pain in his sliced forearm. He stepped over the wreckage of his enemies. Luca moved to the door, opening it to the rainy night. The sirens were distant wails in the wind, coming too late to save the villains, but just in time to herald the rise of a new queen. Enzo carried her out into the storm, not as a prize, but as a partner. The war with the Russos was just beginning, but as he looked down at the woman in his arms, Lorenzo De Luca knew one thing for certain. They had already won the only victory that mattered. And that is how a broken arm led to the fall of an empire and the rise of a queen. Sienna didn't just survive the darkness. She found the one person dangerous enough to love her broken pieces. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Do you think Enzo went too far? Or did Henderson get exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more twisted romance and mafia thrillers, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter.